I would now like to announce the commencement of our first inaugural panel discussion on banking for the unbanked. Would now like to introduce you all to the moderator of this session, Mr. Zubin Tafti, Director Payments and Fintech, SME PwC India. Introducing our panelists, Mr. Anirvan Ghosh Dastidar, Chief Executive Officer, Standard Chartered Bank, Nepal. Mr. Arijit Basu, former Managing Director, Commercial State Bank of India. Mr. Ashutosh Singh, Chief Executive Officer, NSDL Payments Bank. Mr. Deepak Sharma, President and Chief Digital Officer, Kotak Mahindra Bank. Mr. Mrutyunjay Mahapatra, former Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Syndicate Bank. Mr. Nitin Chugh, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Ujjivan Small Finance Bank. Mr. R.A.A. Jayalath, Assistant Governor, Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Once again, a warm welcome, gentlemen, to this amazing panel discussion. I look forward to some amazing and fruitful discussion. With that said, Mr. Zubin Tafti, I would now request you to please kickstart the session.
Yes, thanks, MC, and very good morning to everyone. And I'm very glad to be moderating a very interesting topic with a very power-packed CXO panel. Maybe we'll just start with very quick introductions. Do a quick round of introductions of people that are there on the panel. Zubin Tafti, I'm a director in payments transformation. Basically 14 odd years of experience, a decade over purely in payments. I mean, we're a very large practice focused on payments transformation, and we do strategy to execution. I mean, my mandate in PwC basically is to, do business development and delivery initiatives in two broad segments. One is the non-banking segment, which is your payment processors, fintechs, and even corporates who want to enter into the payment space. And the other segment is we're taking our payments competencies overseas across our network firms. And so I lead a lot of projects across the globe in terms of delivery of our payments competencies. With that as a kind of a short brief, I'll also hand over quickly to my panel members for a quick 60-second brief. Maybe we can start with Mr. Arvind Dastani from Standard Chartered Bank, Nepal.
So I'll spell out my name. It's Anirvan Ghosh Dastidar. Firstly, thank you for having me here, and good morning to everyone, and good morning to all our esteemed panelists and colleagues from the industry. I'm currently the CEO for Standard Chartered Bank Nepal Limited. It is probably the only subsidiary which Standard Chartered has globally, which is publicly held and listed in the Kathmandu Stock Exchange. So very different experience. Prior to this, I was the CEO for the bank in Philippines, Brunei, and Sri Lanka. 28 years in the industry, almost my entire career with Standard Chartered Bank. So I'll pause there, and just to say that I'm probably here to learn a bit more than share, but given the kind of panelists we have today, thank you very much.
Sure, thanks, Arvind. Sorry, Anirvan, I'll correct myself. Mr. Anand Jayalath from Assistant Governor, Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Could you give a short intro?
Good morning to you all. I am Anand Jayalath, an Assistant Governor who is overseeing the payment systems, markets, and strategy. So when markets, it's both international and domestic. Thank you. So,
thank you, Mr. Jayalath. Then we move on to Mr. Arijit Basu, who's been a former Managing Director of Commercial State Bank of India.
Good morning to all, and very happy to be on the panel. Thank you for having us here. Old friends are also on the panel. And I have been with State Bank till 31st October. I have been a career veteran of State Bank. Last assignment for 2.5 years was as Managing Director of the bank. I was specifically looking into commercial clients, risk management, and IT. And prior to that, for a little under 4 years, I was the MD and CEO of SBI's largest subsidiary, SBI Life Insurance, and worked in almost all the verticals that the bank has. And yes, IT and digital transformation that is going on in the ecosystem and the bank, it has been an opportunity for me to have been a part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Arijit Basu. Now moving over to Mr. Mahapatra, who's also I'm part of, led quite a few PSU banks and was the former managing director and CEO of Syndicate Bank. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Started my career with State Bank of India. It was like yesterday, but it is now 4 decades. So worked everywhere, worked abroad, worked in India, worked in US, worked in UK and all. So it's been an interesting journey to see how the ecosystem is transforming and how the stakeholders are repositioning themselves. And financial inclusion have seen firsthand as in various countries, including Bangladesh, Nepal, and all. Also, I have led a few transformations myself, and I take a little pride in being a specialist in setting up new businesses and doing transformation. Currently, I am in the governing council of Reserve Bank of India Innovation Hub, which has been set up recently. Also, have current direct experience because I'm in the board of supervision of NABARD, which is the central bank for cooperative banks and regional rural banks. So to that extent, from a first-hand, from the ringside view I'm having, hope to be of some contribution to the current panel discussion. Thank you.
Sure, Mr. Mahapatra. I think your depth and breadth of experience would add real value to the conversation. And moving on to Mr. Nitin Chugh, who's the Managing Director and CEO of Ujjivan Small Finance Bank. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Zubin. Very happy to be on this panel and thank you for having me here. Well, I'm the CEO of Ujjivan Small Finance Bank, which is a category of differentiated banks in India, set up only about 3.5-4 years ago. Small finance banks, for those of you who know, they were set up in 2015, 2016, largely for the purpose of financial inclusion and for serving the unserved and the underserved. So I've been here for the last year and a little more than that in the CEO role for the last 1 year. Prior to this, I worked with HDFC Bank for nearly 18.5 years, and my last role was the group head of digital banking. So I've had the privilege of front-ending the digital transformation at HDFC Bank for nearly 5 years. And prior to that, I also had a brief stint with Standard Chartered. That was my first foray into banking from 1998 to 2001. So overall in banking for the last 22 years. Thank you very much.
Thanks. I think Mr. Deepak had a family emergency. I'm not sure if he joined. Mr. Deepak, are you there? No, I think in the morning he said he had some family emergency. So anyways, that we get along. Mr. Ashutosh Singh from NSDL? No, I believe we don't have them too. Okay, so thank you everybody. And I think we have a pretty interesting panel, and I think we cover, we have someone from the central bank who takes care of policies. We have a foreign bank, we have PSU banks represented, we also have a formidable private bank, and then we also have, I think, a small finance banks focused on, financial inclusion. So I believe it's a very good panel, a very good combination. I'm looking forward to the conversation that we have. So moving straight into the conversation and some initial questions. So we all know that, globally the unbanked population is pegged around 1.7 odd billion. Southeast Asia and Africa seem to be those pockets where a lot of these unbanked populations lie, more closer in the SAARC countries. And I think our representation that we have here in India, Nepal and Sri Lanka, in most of these countries, maybe Nepal has a little bit of catching up to, but most of the other countries, we've been able to put accounts in most people's hands, at least. I wouldn't say it's done like completely, but some of them as high as 80% we say that have at least accounts. The issue that we see is that these accounts are barely used, were used for maybe a transaction or two, and then seem to kind of fall off in terms of being financially really included. We don't see the products being used, whether it's term deposits, or whether it's taking a loan, or whether it's getting insured, or whether further broadening the real financial inclusion. So, I mean, with that as the backdrop, would like to understand, and maybe I could do a round robin across each of you to see that what are the initiatives that you all in your careers have done as these banks to be able to, get both individuals and MSMEs, because this applies to, both these segments, and very importantly, it's critical to get all of them financially included. There are statistics that provide that if everyone to move formally into the financial ecosystem, we can see GDP growth uplift by just moving from the informal just moving to formal. We can still see GDP grow to up to 3% additionally. Year on year is what we can see if this happens. So with that statistic, there is a real, I mean, there has been a push, and we see that there are a lot of initiatives being taken up by various banks, by various institutions. Just wanted to do a round robin and come to each of you to understand what is it that you've done, what has worked well, any specific lessons that you've learned, and any great outcomes that were achieved. And maybe for this, we'll start with the small finance bank, Mr. Nitin Chugh, to understand what is it that you all have done in the recent past to be able to drive the agenda that you all were built for.
So for individuals, Zubin, it's reasonably simple. Everybody needs a bank account to start with, but it doesn't really stop there, because financial inclusion is not so much about just opening a bank account. So we've been trying to focus on bringing in banking habits with our customers, which requires a combination of the right kind of products, things like micro insurance, especially on the health side, because people don't necessarily save up for health emergencies. We've been encouraging our customers to also get their families to open accounts with us and start transacting in them. More recently, in the last year and a half, we've introduced them to QR codes so that they start creating their own micro payment ecosystems where they also start accepting payments in cash. Because unless you reduce the input side of cash, there is no hope that you can reduce the output side of cash. That's on the individual side, and it's a long journey to be traveled. Most people we see are very hesitant in even operating their bank account. So they have money in the bank account, they would just make a trip to the ATM, withdraw everything in cash, and then continue spending in cash. So I think it's a more long-term thing. Specific to MSE, and we don't deal with the medium category, we deal with the micro and the small. You actually need a program, and we do have a full product program to deal with the informal segments, because it requires a lot of legwork. It requires somebody to go and sit at the outlet, map the footfalls, look at the cash flow. Sometimes nothing is documented. You have to help prepare the borrower to go through all of that and make them understand as to why formalizing is important. And they do have cash flows in cash a lot of times, which you have to encourage them to move to more formalized way of transacting. So I think we try and run it more as a program rather than as an initiative, because one, for the fact that it's our charter to serve the unserved and the underserved, including the MSME, the MSE. But equally important is to also do this through a systematic intervention of a product, a process, and some technology intervention, so that we also get a good view of what kind of a portfolio are we building up, and then what kind of other interventions can be made possible using analytics, etc. So I think we are probably somewhere, I would say 20-30% in the journey, or not just us, but as an industry, and there's still a lot to do.
Sure, thanks, Nitin. So I think moving on to Mr. Mahapatra and Mr. Arijit, I mean, in your extensive career across PSU banks and State Bank, more specifically, also being one of the largest PSU banks, would like to understand what were these initiatives and how is it that you all have been able to help both individuals and MSMEs or SMEs, micro SMEs get into the formal financial fold?
Arijit, will you go first, or unmute yourself?
Thanks, Mrutyunjay. That is another challenge that we have. We forget to unmute ourselves. So maybe I can start. It's one or two misconceptions that are there. Starting on a lighter note, we mentioned public sector banks, and one of the largest public sector banks. So I think having just left SBI, let me clarify that it is not one of the largest public sector bank. It happens to be not only the largest public sector bank, but by a fair mile, it happens to be the largest bank in India, almost 4 times the size of of the next bank which is there in the country. So that's on a, just to give a perspective, because when we are talking of numbers and we are talking of financial inclusion, there are, niche things that have to be done by different kinds of players, like Ujjivan, and the entire small finance bank is doing a very important role. But when you talk of scale and reaching out to 130 crore Indians, there is also need for very large institutions. The second misconception that to some extent I would like to correct is that this Jan Dhan accounts are all kind of, they have just been opened and there is no balance in them. So the latest data that I have from State Bank, because State Bank roughly did about 40% of the entire, while we have a 20% market share in terms of Jan Dhan accounts and the financial inclusion ecosystem, State Bank did about 40%. So currently, the total balance in these Jan Dhan accounts in State Bank is around 45,000 crores. And I think touching 50,000 crores now. Even for State Bank, it is a large number. And to disaggregate, this is about 2,500 crores per account. So which is not by any means a small number. Because you have to understand who are these people. They are the poorest of the poor in India. They have been, it's not that they don't have a bank account only. It's as if they don't have many things. They are just, but perhaps above subsistence level. So when we are talking, I think Zubin mentioned about having term deposits. You need to have that earning to open a term deposit or giving of loans. You need to have the capacity to be able to absorb that loan and do something productive. So two things I think are very important and which SBI has taken the lead in doing. One is ease of convenience. If you want people to adopt digital technology, then you need to make it easy for them. And the best example we have in India is UPI. UPI was launched in 2016. From zero, it is now, at least for the larger banks, it is 45 to 50% of the payment mode, right? It has overtaken anything, and NEF, RTGS. Why? Only because it is beautifully simple and very well designed. The second thing is that alone may not suffice, which is why you need the last mile connect to people. Like Nitin rightly mentioned, that you have to go with various kinds of products. Insurance can be a very good start. You have to give them small value loans. But who does it? Who explains? Digital is the enabler. But somebody needs to work with them, and that is where the bank mitras or the banking correspondents, they come in. In SBI and the public sector banks, we have worked with them for long. But I think what needs to happen even more is that their skilling and their ability to understand the ecosystem needs to improve. And I'm sure that will happen. COVID has taken people towards digital, but the need for cash will remain. I think I will not say things about that in the first round because I'm sure we will have questions around that. But initially, I think having ease of convenience, have your digital capabilities. All banks now have excellent digital capabilities attuned to the common man and the poorest of the poor, and also the assisted mode where you are able to reach out to the customer. These would be the important things which would enable this ecosystem to flourish.
Thank you, Mr. Basu. Mr. Mahapatra?
Thank you. I think we have got some details both from Nitin and Arijit. So let me give you my experience that how I manage the strategy, both when I was at the CXO level in State Bank of India and I was the CEO of a large bank and responsible. So as they say in customer journey, if you have to understand how to take banking to the unbanked, management tells us to understand what are the unserved and underserved needs of that unbanked. If we make our minds clear about that, then unserved and underserved needs itself will present themselves as the universe of our strategies in the coming days, whether we are central bankers, whether you are doing innovation or you are doing just small scale banking. So I believe that to understand what is financial inclusion, we must put our fingers on what is financial exclusion. Why somebody is called financially excluded. I think there are 4 or 5 types of exclusions that I decided my team must deal with in small or large measures in order that we serve that particular customer or particular customer group. First one is the product and channel exclusion. We, as you told rightly, we give a savings bank account with 500 rupees and we think that we have banked them. What are the other products? How do we take the payment ecosystem to them? How do we bring credit to them? So that product exclusion, can we add? And I successfully tried it in getting 1 or 2 additions to those Jandhan accounts. And it was hugely successful in 2 or 3 pockets in collaboration with NABARD. Second one was a technology exclusion. We are talking of, doing a Aadhaar based verification where even 2G is not working. So how do we bring this exclusion, at least in pockets? And what I tried was that, under the CSR, having 2 or 3 towers in a cluster and creating an ecosystem. In SBI also, we tried it in Raigad district. We went to a village and gave, on a white Fi basis, gave through the cable operators temporary, kind of Wi-Fi connection, so that once in a day, the fellow gets to the banking and he downloads whatever are the transactions that is happening. Third one is the management exclusion. We go gaga, we tell about, banking correspondents being the substitute or the proxy to a real banker. But good quality, intelligent bankers, the reality is that they do not want to work in the rural areas. So how do we find workarounds? And collaboration exclusion. Most of the collaboration is happening in this area, whereas it is not happening in the unbanked area. So what I did was that there was a company called Atyati Technology, which is promoted by a young man, Suresh Prabhu, and I got in collaboration with them, and we onboarded a large number of people based on offline technology. And last I want to tell is what is important is gender exclusion. If we see the rural areas, the women emancipation that we see, unbanked women percentage, by simply focusing on that, I told Atyati Technologies and my branch network that from henceforth, 60%, at least 51% of your bookings must be for women. And so we will have to bring those forcing devices in order to get ahead in terms of the financial inclusion and banking the unbanked. Thank you. I hope I have provoked some thoughts.
Yes, Mahapatra, thank you for sharing, and how to build a strategy is very important. And I think you've covered very, very important key elements. So I think we'd like to welcome Mr. Deepak Sharma, who just joined us. So welcome to the panel. And I understand you have a family agency and really appreciate you joining on that. Maybe you can start with a short introduction, and then maybe I'll also kind of lay down the first question that I'd have for you. So y'all as a digital bank do a lot of work, in the digital space. And I'm guessing you'll also do collaborate a lot with the fintech community. So just wanted to understand from you, what do you do on the digital side when it comes to financial inclusion, and how have your experiences been in collaborating with some of these fintechs to be able to achieve, the objectives? Over to you, Mr. Deepak.
Yeah, thanks, and sorry to be joining late. I think I'm the least prepared one for this because I was planning to regret, but I think I was told even if I can join for 5 minutes, and I just wanted to be here because we have great set of friends on the panel today. So also wanted to use this opportunity to say hi to a lot of friends here. Yeah, I think as a bank, obviously, unlike SBI and some of the small finance bank, we still, I would say, have a very, very weak presence on the rural side. But that doesn't mean that when it comes to financial inclusion, we haven't looked at opportunities and gone deeper. 2 or 3 things that I think we have started with and then we are working towards. One is the microfinance piece, because having acquired a microfinance business in southern part of India, we have gone deeper in in pockets like in Andhra, Telangana, Karnataka. So for us, we still think, like what I heard Mr. Mahapatra say and Nitin speak, I think getting deeper is a challenge. And especially when the business models, what it works for larger markets or metro is you can go wide. But I think in the business models, once we go into the markets which are less connected, I think it needs a more integrated and deeper one. And we felt that what we could not achieve directly with the banking network, post our ING acquisition, we found a strong foothold in South because ING had a lot of branch and the distribution presence in smaller towns and locations. And then with the microfinance business, we connected and went deeper and said that how can we do probably a last mile better in, even if it's 5 or 6 states to start with, rather than doing spray and pray across the country. The second thing on which we rode was what were our natural strengths. And somewhere we realized we had a very, very strong presence in tractor business. In fact, as we speak, we are the largest tractor finance firm in the country. And the numbers have even gone further post-COVID. So we used agri and tractor as our 2 vehicles of lending, around which we started to build our presence across the country. And when I say these 2 products took us wider, and microfinance kind of business took us deeper. And combining these 2, the idea is to build a new insights on the agri marketplace, connecting an ecosystem for the rural and connected, which is not directly a financial play, but idea is to see how we can create a wider ecosystem which gives us better insights and data, which can help in terms of new product creation and the loan underwriting. And I think this is where joining hands, especially on the financial inclusion, in my mind, is the only way, because one cannot go and do it all. And even recently, about a month back, the directives that came from the government where each bank had to go and adopt few districts and go deeper on driving either digital payments or transactions or last mile. I think are all those initiatives where we are all working together with the nodal PSU bank for those districts. So I think as an industry, it's important for us to come together, banks, non-banks and fintech, and play on each other's strength to see how do we create a viable ecosystem where one does not need to take all the cost or not take it forward just because the business model is not viable. And I think working together, we will be able to build more such viable business models.
Thank you, Mr. Deepak. So Deepak, just one more question to you, and then maybe I understand you need to go. One is, I think no discussion is complete without talking about the pandemic and the impact that COVID has had. While of course we know that it has given an impetus to people to start transacting digitally, I think the question more I understand is that have they started really getting in new users? Have we started getting people to start using those accounts that may not have been used, or getting people to start transacting more than they were? I'm talking about new users, because I know the existing ones have already moved and started doing most of their cash ones digitally. And the question more is to understand how is that, and do you have any statistics or any trends that you're seeing on that front?
So I will just narrate a very recent experience. Right now, as we speak, I'm not in Mumbai. I'm in a place which is far off from Mumbai. I just took some time out to say, let me try working from a non-home location, so as to say. And I think what I'm learning here is the digital transactions are just leapfrogging, so as to say. I went to a chemist store and the guy said ki UPI se payment kar do aap. People are not even willing to touch cash, and this was a big eye-opener, because I think when you see things from a metro lens or urban market lens, you have one picture. But I think when we experience what's happening in the ground in smaller towns, locations, the rural markets, I think there's a transformational change. It's also because you don't see a lot of small denomination currency in the market in circulation anymore. Very difficult to find a 10 rupee, 20 rupee, 50 rupee kind of notes. So one is the impact of pandemic. Second is also the shortage of cash. And I think this too has brought in a lot of first-time users who have started to do this. Simple reason being that today when you go out in the market in smaller cities, I mean, it's not just e-commerce, big e-com companies that are driving it. These are small mom and pop stores, a bakery and a kirana store and a medical store and a hardware store. And I think when these merchants understand how they can accept payment digitally, and they are comfortable accepting it, and believe me, most of them, they don't want to accept payment through POS. I think that has been another eye-opener that I've seen. Even if they have a POS, they have just hidden POS somewhere. So they just don't want to accept payment through cards. And this is a big shift that's happening. And in my mind, once the ecosystem of people who want to accept payment, who are the merchants, and the consumers who are ready to pay is there, there's no stopping this growth.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Deepak. So moving on to, I would say, let me keep the question the same and moving on to maybe Mr. Ananda and Mr. Anirvan. I mean, giving us a view from, either Sri Lanka or Nepal respectively, how have you seen the COVID impact, the financial inclusion in new users? Is it the same? Is it the same there, or is it something different?
If I may start with, given you were already aware that Sri Lanka, in terms of conventional yardsticks, is a well-banked country. We have about over 85% the people with bank accounts adults, and number of branches, 400,000 people is about 20, close to 20. So in terms of those conventional yardsticks, it's well-banked. But when you look in detail into the usage of these accounts, unfortunately less than 50% frequent use. So that is a challenge we are facing. On the other hand, the farmer in a remote area need to come to a city to do his banking needs. And that, again, a challenge. He has to waste a lot of precious time he could have used for productivity, his farm or land, and it will do his traveling and painting, things like those. So having understood this, Sri Lanka introduced digital payments some time back, and latest one among that is 2018. We introduced standard for QR, Lanka QR standard. So with that standardization, we have the interoperability, and together with that, it's EMB core based, and innovation encouraged. The security is again looked after, and major challenge is customer education and awareness. And you mentioned COVID. COVID, of course, a blessing for us in a way, because there's a growing concern of usage of cash. May not be very, very significant in reality, but the concern of the public has grown and media has brought that up. And what we have seen in the recent past was 4 to 5-fold increase in the digital transaction usage. Of course, number of new users has increased significantly. And together with that comes the awareness challenge, and with the people who have less sound and financial literacy, and do all kinds of things. For instance, simple things like sharing password, giving password of that. And recently there was a scandal for OTP. Someone who is posing as a person to lend, he gets information through the internet asking him to do. He said that I am going to deposit small sum. Let me know what is the sum that deposited. So he got the credentials of bank account, and challenge was that the other person, without knowing that, is disclosing this information. So we have gone to the media, gone to public very widely, and try to educate public. So unfortunately for us, the awareness is little by little increasing, but not the level that I would like, and it's not at the ideal level. But there is a growing challenge because we have a aging population. It's peculiar to the region, but at the same time, that older population, they are little slow to come into the digital arena. And of course, younger generation is getting adopted, and younger generation, we are using younger generation as a beacon to go into this older population. So little by little, these things are increasing. We see that we are seeing increasing usage of the digital means. In terms of QR and central bank going beyond its conventional activity, launched advertising campaign and to popularize this electronic transactions among masses. And with that, we have gone over the TV as well as radio to very frequent alternative. And what we are seeing is people are little by little getting used to this and getting adapted to this. Of course, we have organized multi-level awareness. One thing is what we have seen first was even the bank staff, except the digitally savvy population, the others, counter staff, even at times the remote manager, was not aware of digital activity that is taking place within the bank. So as a part of this multi-level strategy, what we have done is we have start with the central bank, and it's a very successful event that is about in February this year. And after that, we go to the branches, the banks themselves has organized awareness campaign for them. Because when the customer comes to the bank and when they inquire about this, if the person answering telephone or the manager is not aware of it, how can you convince the customer? So those were the challenge. So, and banks started, and it is continuing. And we started district-wise. Sri Lanka has 9 districts. And before the second wave of COVID, we completed 3 largest districts in the awareness campaign. Together with banks, it's not the central bank who's going into the front, it's the banks who are going. So we organized the banks, and banks went to the front, and they really got on board number of new vendors. And when vendors increase, the awareness increases, as earlier mentioned. So the vendors, little by little coming into this one, we have seen that even the customers are coming in. So together with that, we see, as I mentioned, that we see multifold increase in the digital usage. And our team is going for less cash society. And with that, we have introduced advertising campaign, I think supported by all banks, cards, and all clearing houses, everyone. And it's called Cash Wade. Wade is trouble, problem. So Cash Trouble, that it's education program, and little by little, it will going into the masses. So with that, we hope that we will be able to catch up this and go into masses. There won't be any necessity for them to come into the city to do their banking needs, financial needs, and most. Of course, with the digital awareness and digital expansion, what we have seen is unwanted activities also coming. So we need to step into regulation. For example, loan sharks. They have gone in different means through the web or electronic transaction, charging very high rates. And that increases indebtedness, particularly the small people. So, and we are addressing that as well and increasing the awareness. We may not be able to, as regulator, control each and every activity of the public, but what is more important is awareness and financial literacy. So central bank is spearheading that, banks, all card and other stakeholders are participating in this initiative in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, sir. We go to Mr. Anirvan from Nepal. So does being an international bank, help in, leading financial innovation, that would bring in the, access to financial services to your, below the pyramid? So just wanted to understand your views that, because as you just said in the initial introduction that, you all are different in the ecosystem that you play. So how does that help you or not?
Yeah, we are different, but we can't be left out. And ironically, we are listed in Nepal. We don't own the whole bank. But firstly, Mr. Jayalath, always nostalgic to hear about Sri Lanka. Probably spent the best 6 years of my life there when Governor Cabral was there, was heading the bank. I'm actually struggling to place this. I'll stick to the question. So firstly, a bit about Nepal. And you're right. You said Nepal is still evolving. I had a perception change. I actually moved from Southeast Asia after many, many years. I didn't move from India. So for me, Nepal was just mountains and the Gurkhas. They've probably seen, Nepal has seen over 20 governments in 25 years. Monarchy gone, insurgency, earthquake. And in the last 2 years, and we were almost getting the country rated. So just to give you a sense, 60% of the population less than 40 and a median age of 23. That's how young the country is, right? And a GDP growth of 7% plus pre-COVID. So it was moving very fast with infra and sandwiched between China, India, the obvious geopolitics and playing on both sides, infrastructure coming in. Oil, for water is the oil for Nepal. I mean, harnessable energy of 30,000 megawatts. And a lot of literacy coming up, primary school enrollment coming up. So for us, we're very bullish about Nepal. And between India and China, you can't go wrong. And with what is happening in next door, a lot of Nepalis studying their young population. I think first is for international banks like us, we do a lot of risk participation. So to your question, the multilaterals are very active in Nepal, CDC specifically. So we do a lot of risk participation in the BFI space and the directed lending space because we have balance sheet. Now we, as an international bank, our prime objective is network and everything else that we do. And I can talk about the API banking, digital bank, which we've done in other parts of the world, especially Africa, which we're trying to replicate in Nepal. So one is the risk participation. Nepal, interestingly, like India, but I think it's a bit severe, that they have a very demanding directed lending requirements across energy, agri, MSMEs. And it's almost to the extent where banks have to lend 45% of the balance sheet. Now, for banks like us, where our branches are limited, we have no option but to partner and collaborate. So whether it's launching debt instruments, bonds. So there is a quasi way, a surrogate way of helping other banks and cooperatives to meet those targets. And we feel that's the way we serve the nation through partnership and collaboration. One example which I would give, and Mr. Basu would like that also, and which we are very proud of as an Indian also. The two banks which do a big service to the nation is SBI and Standard Chartered. So we distribute very high six-figure pensions to the Gurkhas. So we do it for the British soldiers. SBI does it for the Indian Army. And that's massive. I mean, it's probably our biggest cash business. Till recently, it was a headache. We had pension counters, people crowding branches. It was a nightmare, old pensioners. It's moving to digital now. So just to give you an idea that the push has come where, and we've got, for an international bank, we still have branches in far off places, which would be unthinkable in most of our countries where we operate. And it was largely because of the British Gurkha pensions, right? And some of the developmental organizations we work with. So one example, I mean, the SBI numbers are much bigger because the Indian Army contingent for Gurkhas are bigger. We are almost there. We do it for the British and the Singapore police force. So just to give you an idea, and some of the examples, as Mr. Jayalath said, how do the farmers come into the city? If you look at the geography of Nepal, I mean, you've got 5 houses on top of this hill, 10 houses on top of this mountain, and then you trek all the way down to find another 20. Besides the plains, and this is something one is learning. And there are a lot of cooperatives. We don't have the non-bank sector. We don't have disruptive non-banks yet because we're very overbanked. We've almost got 28 A-class commercial banks. But Nepal is bound to catapult like Africa straight from the good old black phones right into the digital world because they're missing that gap in between because of the unrest and the earthquake and all the devastation the country has gone through. And now just leapfrogging into the new world where we're seeing wallets, fintechs and everything. And that's where we come in as an international bank, tying up with the e-commerce platform, we're working with Ant Financial and other parts of the world. So it's a big benefit being next to India, and a lot of the Indian players have started coming in. In fact, we are starting using local technology from India rather than looking at our sophisticated ones from Singapore, which are much more costly. So I'll pause here.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Anirvan. Also, from a COVID standpoint, do you see that creating this shift that we see everywhere else from, the traditional cash or check, paper-based instruments into electronic, and any trends there?
Yeah, so it's an obvious answer, and for us, while it's been extremely damaging, where we've lost staff, we've got impacted, but it's come as a blessing. I mean, we probably had a far more severe lockdown, which a lot of people don't realize. I mean, we were locked down for 6 months, like a military-style curfew. We continue to operate. I mean, if I just throw some numbers, our credit card spend has shot to the roof, new enrollment. RTGS is new to Nepal. I mean, it might sound a bit funny because most countries have already moved ahead that part. But RTGS volumes have shot up to something like 70%. Wallet volumes almost 60%. We've seen our mobile volumes go up 40%. iBanking volumes, traditionally, we are not a very big retail bank, unlike the local bank. So the balance between brick and mortar and this thing, but people now realize that they want that touchless kind of. So wallets are a big thing now. And I think the new normal will be less of branches and more of payment capabilities. And the good thing is the Central Bank of Nepal has announced a digital roadmap, which includes a lot of API-based banking. If they can sort out the Aadhaar card kind of initiative, which probably we'll talk about it, what the big bet is, then with a population of 30 million, Nepal has a very bright future if the political stability continues.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Anirvan. So I heard literacy, and I heard this being talked about by most of the panelists, and I think we believe that, literacy is a very important aspect of financial inclusion, whether it is getting them literate about what those products are and how they can benefit them, or if they're first users, to not sure they fall into trap of people to get misused or get fraud. So just wanted to hear from a couple of you in terms of what is it that you all as banks are doing on the literacy front, because we believe that's it's also the benefits of that is, it takes time and there's a lot of investment to be made in literacy. So just wanted to know what are the new initiatives or what are the new trends that you're seeing on building financial literacy. We did hear Mr. Ananda talk about it in Sri Lanka and then driving it from the central bank perspective. We just wanted to hear also from, individual banks. Maybe I can hear from Mr. Nitin and then Mr. from Mahapatra side also.
Financial literacy for Ujjivan is fairly integrated with our overall, plans and the way we conduct our business. So we have a foundation called Parinam, which works very closely with the beneficiaries of microfinance, and they run very structured programs. And we also, in fact, have a social services department within the bank. These are the people who also go out and volunteer, and they also carry this whole program into the field. So for the last 10 years, I think we've been able to cover nearly 1 million beneficiaries through the financial literacy program. And these are completely classroom-led, interventions where we get a group of women and we train them in trying to be financially independent. That's one. The second thing is that we also develop sustainable infrastructure for continuing education of children. So we have a project called Chote Kadam, again, which we deliver with the help of Parinam, where we pick up a dilapidated school building. We will pick up something which requires a better infrastructure, and we would redo that whole infrastructure as part of our CSR outlay. And we continue doing that, about 50 to 60 of those properties every year. Small scale, but very meaningful, because these are very sustainable and they actually make sure that the continuity of the education is always there. Now what we're trying to do is that we're trying to bring in digital inclusion, because now we realize that financial literacy has to be taken to digital literacy, because finally we don't want a situation a few years down the line where people are financially included but digitally excluded because they can't transact on their own and they need to make trips to the banks. And to that extent, we are modifying the curriculum, and we also realize that it is probably wise to now start using more of tech. And we experimented in the last 6 months during the lockdown phase, and otherwise we actually shifted the whole financial literacy program into COVID education. So we got the same set of people to train and educate the beneficiaries about COVID, about safety, sanitization, etc. And we tried and work with the local authorities to the extent that we could. But we made it run into a program, and a lot of that was delivered digitally, which is giving us the confidence that we can actually run this at scale. And now we're actually thinking that why 1 million in 10 years? Why can't we do 10 million in the next 5 years and cover as many people as we can? And more so, we also cover non-customers. So it's not like we only cover customers of Ujjivan. We cover pretty much everybody who we can cover in that area. And for us, we do realize that if you really want sustained inclusion or financial inclusion, it is important not just literacy, not just to bring in literacy, but also extend it to people to be able to get included digitally. Because eventually everything is going to get delivered on digital channels and platforms. And that is where creating these ecosystems and making people use them and be aware of them is going to be extremely important. So all I can say in conclusion is that it is very integral to financial inclusion, and without that, it cannot be sustained. You will see people going there, like we saw during demonetization. People switched to digital, but they switched back to cash as soon as the cash came back. Okay, so we don't want a situation like that either.
Sure, thank you, Nitin. So I think we're almost approaching our end, and so I'll have one last question, and we will take inputs from everyone. So, and this question is: if you had to bet,
want me to? Can I add one just thing?
Sure, Mr. Mahapatra.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. In the rural areas, financial literacy, people there are not willing to listen what is wealth and what is insurance and all. Because whenever I was a CEO, I used to make it a point that every third branch that I visit must be a rural branch. And of course, like Arijit and all, we had mandatory rural assignments. So there you will have to propagate financial literacy by showing, not by telling. And two things that have worked for me. One is telling them the power of compounding. Many of them think that if I put 100 rupees a month, it will become 1200 rupees at the end of the year. But when I tell them that it becomes, 1300 rupees because of the power of compounding, this is one thing that has worked. Power of compounding as a mean of, as some kind of a medium of spreading financial literacy. Second one was that shifting from, non-productive asset to productive assets. Many of them, they do not know that, they have a dream of having gold for child's marriage or for, building a house where they will live. But when I tell them that you allocate a portion for buying a cow or, doing a small thing, financial literacy spreads just like that because they can see it. So this is what I wanted to tell, that we must pick up small things that work for spreading financial literacy rather than speaking in concepts.
Sure, Mr. Mahapatra. I think the power of compounding is a very important concept, and that is something that does show benefit for people. So I think that's a great one. So moving to the last question, and this is, if you were to, bet on this one initiative, or maybe even put in place or change a current policy that you believe will give the maximum, impetus to financial inclusion in the regions, in the banks, in where you operate, I would like to hear what that one bet would be and why. And maybe for that, we can start with Mr. Anirvan first, and then move on to Mr. Ananda, and then move into for the Indian point of view. Yeah, Mr. Anirvan, over to you.
No, thanks. The example I would give may not sound very exciting because we're probably behind in Nepal, but the whole integration of the payment system, which the central bank is driving, and the national ID system, in a country which is a big recipient of remittances and highly consumption-led. And now there are wallets, a lot of fintech providers. Our biggest bet would be that because it integrates, it's a very small country for 30 million people, national ID system and all that coming in. I think that would be a big, and everybody knows the outcome of that. If you've seen it in states in India and all that. So it's like counting one more, so both, one more geography which gets integrated completely. So that's our bet we would place on.
Sure, Anirvan. Thank you, sir. Mr. Ananda, for you in Sri Lanka, I understand you all have already done a lot of initiatives. Just want to know if there's anything else that you believe can be done to be able to, further the financial inclusion agenda. What would be that one thing?
Yeah. To me, as regulator, I would say it's open banking. Open banking, sharing financial information. securely and electronically, of course with customer consent. So I think open banking would allow the banking system open to many of the fintechs. And fintechs have very good solutions. Unfortunately, they can't come into the arena because they are handicapped by the unavailability of bank. They are not as big as bank. So we think that if we can allow them to do the developments and come together with the banks, and that will open up the market. And of course, we have introduced eKYC based on blockchain, and it's the proof of concept being prepared by a number of the private sector participants, including banks, together with banks. And we have given it to, if I may mention the number, is three parties are competitively developing. And once it is available, of course, we will be able to share the available information with the banking community among each other. You know, if the KYC is very costly and very cumbersome, you need for reporting record. And this will be resolved through this kind of thing. Same time, we were trying from the long time to the eKYC, but that is the authorities from the central bank, and we have to depend on the person's registration here in Sri Lanka. And of course, they are moving forward, but it will take time. Until such time, if you can bring this blockchain-based KYC for sharing information, which is already available to the bank. If one bank has done the verification, the others also can be depend on that, because it's standardized.
So, thank you.
Tax.
Yes,
that is
thank you,
the experience.
Yes, open banking and I would say blockchain-based eKYC, I think are two initiatives that you see. Moving on to Mr. Nitin Chugh, what would be that one bet from your side?
I would agree with Mr. Jayalath. I think I personally believe open banking is a great chance for all of us in the subcontinent to really take this forward, because I think we've tried with many experiments and some of them are really successful, like the small finance bank experiment as a differentiated bank, or the PSL as an objective for all the banks. But despite that, I think there are many more people who are very serious in this space who can really add value, especially with technology firms, analytics, people who are now specializing in rural fintech, etc. We all need to come together, and the only way we can come together is not by one-on-one partnerships, but by really opening up the whole ecosystem to open banking and allowing as many people who are willing to work in that space collaboratively and make a big difference over a shorter period of time than it would otherwise take individually.
Sure. Thank you, Nitin, sir. Mr. Arijit Basu?
Yeah, so broadly on the same lines, but if you look at the India stack, it's basically presence-less, which we have achieved to some extent, paperless, cashless, and then consent. So if you look at the India stack in totality, Aadhaar, then digital payments, UPI, DigiLocker. In India, we are at various stages, I think. We have not managed to get in. And open banking, as Mr. Jayalath rightly said, is the ultimate further end use, because you'll be able to get everyone on a particular platform, which can help. But how we were, for financial inclusion, how we are able to utilize this ecosystem and reach out to the last mile with some assistance, because at least in countries like India, I do not think, which is why financial literacy and effective use of bank networks will be very important. But somewhere, I think the India stack had moved quite a bit, but we have slowed down to proper movement of that.
Sure, Arijit, sir. Thank you. Thank you for that. And lastly, Mr. Mahapatra, from your side. Okay, I think we've lost Mr. Mahapatra. So I think we're kind of almost done, and I think we're a little bit over time. So I would like to thank the panel for sharing all your inputs and all your insights and all your knowledge. And very glad, very interesting. We had a lot of other topics, but of course, short of time. And thank you very much for that. And with that, I'll hand it over back to the MC.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tafti. Indeed, I think if this panel had to continue to go on, I would have, all I would have done is just catch hold of my mug and then just listen to you guys, because it was so informative. I mean, especially the information coming from various markets, right? I mean, it's not just India. There were some really interesting facts to know that, 50% of the transactions are happening in India through UPI. I mean, I did not know that. And clearly, just right at the start of the session, Mr. Tafti said that, we are today here sitting with the esteemed gentleman, and yes, with the discussion, it is true, and I would love to believe that. In fact, I wish this panel didn't have to end. But with that said, we've got another set all set to get started with. So once again, thank you so much for throwing that light on how financial systems do really work, how it is growing in India and also in external market. With that said, thank you so much, gentlemen. And once again, stay tuned as we have the next session. Also, before we start with our next session, here's some good news for you all. We have some Amazon vouchers up for grabs. And to bag one, all you have to do is just visit our virtual photo booth, click your picture and share it on your social media channels. Do not forget to tag, if you are going to post it on LinkedIn, go ahead, tag Sapphire Connect. If you are going to post it on Twitter, go ahead, tag @Connect Sapphire. If you're going to post it on Facebook, do not forget to tag @Sapphire Connect. And yes, very important, please do follow the hashtag as well. That is SC Payground is the hashtag. SCPAYGROUND. That's the hashtag of today's summit.